Hi, this is Len Edgerly. It is August 2nd, 2019, and I'm here in Ocean Park, Maine. I have a slightly different episode for you today because of some developments this week in my family, and I'll talk to you about that after the interview, and there won't be any news or tech tips or other features, but I did have a chance to record a conversation with Cassie Dandridge Selleck earlier this week, and so we're going to jump right into that. Cassie Dandridge Selleck, like my guest A.G. Riddle last week, is an example of how Amazon's Kindle direct publishing platform has really changed lives for many writers. She, too, transitioned from a non-writing career to become a successful self-published author. Her first book, The Pecan Man, begins in 1976 and explores revolutions in race relations and the role of women in the South. I caught up with Cassie by Skype and phone at her home in Mayo, Florida on Wednesday, July 28th. Mayo is about 80 miles southeast of Tallahassee. I began by asking her to read a passage from the first chapter of The Pecan Man, which she published in January of 2012. The narrator of the book is Oralee Beckworth, in her old age recalling a tragedy that decades before that befell the family of her housekeeper, Blanche Lowry.
Well, this is actually one of my favorite passages. I think it tells a whole lot about the relationship between Aura and Blanche. Blanche worked for me through birth and death, joy and sorrow, and Lord knows we had a lot of sorrow in all the time we spent together under this roof. Most people figured she was crazy to put up with me all those years, but Blanche and I had an understanding. It was a vow we made those long years ago. Neither of us spoke of it afterwards, but it hung between us like a spider web, fragile and easy to break, but danged hard to get shed of once the threads took hold. It's been a quarter of a century since fate sealed the two of us together. Blanche got fatter, but never looked a day older than she did back then. I, on the other hand, have managed to get thinner and more fragile, if that's possible. I'm 82 years old. I was 57 then and recently widowed. I'd tell you about my husband, Walter, but he doesn't really play a part in this story, so I reckon there's not much point. Funny. I don't remember what color Walter's eyes were. I'll chalk that up to what age does to an already feeble mind. But I remember every single detail about what happened with the Pecan Man.
Now, who's our narrator there?
Oralee Beckworth. She is a Southern lady who has lived her life doing all the things that Southern society expects of her. And she finds herself in this final situation where she's making decisions on her own without care for what anyone might say and without anyone directing her moves, and she's thrown into this situation where she starts having to make choices based on someone else's needs and not her own. So.
Now, and to set the story in history, she's 57 at the start of the story, and that's the year 1976?
Yes.
And then it goes, it's quite a span then up to she's 82 as she's telling
2001, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then geographically, you set the story in a town that you grew up in, Leesburg, Florida.
Yes, it's right smack dab in the middle of the state.
Tell me a little bit about Leesburg.
Leesburg back in the 70s was really sort of idyllic to grow up in. I was raised there. My daddy was raised there. He wasn't born there, but he was raised in Leesburg. That's where my parents met. And but it's situated right in the center of the state, a small town northwest of Orlando and south of Gainesville. And it was a town where, back then you could walk anywhere. We're in a couple of miles of everything, and kids pretty much had free run. But it was also a time of real change. I was in Leesburg schools. The first African American came to our school in 1968 when I was in fifth grade. So, this was, 8 years later. And so things were changing, But what I remember about that was not changing enough. You know, people were still affected by the inherent racism that sort of lives there.
It's interesting because Aura Lee has this freedom after her husband dies to make her own decisions in navigating this fraught period around the issues of race. And it's almost as if the racism and feminism are kind of playing off each other. Is that sort of how you remember it and part of the story that you're telling here?
Absolutely. And I really haven't heard it phrased exactly like that, but that's perfect. I'll steal it and use it. You know, I'm writing fiction. The story is fiction, but it certainly parallels many of my experiences as a woman, as a young girl growing up in this era, and having friends of color who I could see for myself did not have the same experience I did in this world. And because my mother was very forward-thinking, very liberal, and yet she lived with a misogynist all of her life, you know? Mm-hmm. And so it was always a battle, and it was just always something that was very clear to me. I could just see injustice around me everywhere I was, from a feminist perspective and from a racial perspective. I could see. And my mother said, I came from the womb railing against injustice. It was just something that just eats at me. It still does to this day. I just want things to be fair. And so,
well, that's interesting. Are there family stories of you as a 6-year-old speaking out in ways that showed where you were headed?
From the time I could speak. In fact, a couple of nicknames. They started calling me Goose when I was very young because I had this loud, honking voice, and I used it a lot. And then that morphed into Goosey Lucy, and my mother called me Lucy all my life, which, when the Charlie Brown series came out, was just appropriate. I was Lucy. I was just, just always trying to help people, like the psychiatrist is in thing. I was always trying to tell people what they should do and how they should be. It really hasn't changed a whole lot either, Lynn. It's still this way. But
it's serving you well as an author, I think. Now, the other thing that you've said that's interesting is that you were sort of hearing your mother's voice as you told the story in Aura Lee's voice. And is the story of her evolution around her relationships with Eddie and Blanche pretty much your mother's story? You're thinking of her in the story as well as the voice, or also your own?
Well, both. I mean, it's her voice that is that sharp-witted, funny, just saying the most irreverent things, which is me too, but I get it from my mom. And she was also just a gifted storyteller. Everything was a story. But a lot of the perspective changes, because my mother, when the first African-American child was coming to our school, my mother sat me down because he was going to be in my classroom, and she knew this. Now, I had never heard anything about race, never heard anything negative, or, it just never heard anything. It just wasn't spoken of in our house. Nobody was ever bad-mouthed, let's put it that way. And we certainly never used any racial slurs. But anyway, my mom sat me down, and she said this, and she explained segregation and integration this way, that the black schools, that the laws were supposed to be separate but equal, but they had never been equal. And children who went to black schools got less hand-me-down books and less money than the white schools, and that was unfair. And they were trying to fix that. And Rodney was coming to our classroom, and I was to make him feel welcome and be his friend. And that's how she explained integration to me. And so, of course, I was all over that. And I don't remember protests. I don't remember anything negative. And I think it's the way my mom framed it for me. So that was how it was set up. And then the next year was full integration, and I met my best friend in life, Julie, who is a black woman now, black girl then. And my mom, I mean, she was always at our house. My mom encouraged the friendship. So did her parents. And so it was like, at the time, I didn't even really realize there was anything going on. But as we went through time and I saw how the world treated her differently than I did, it was my lessons in perspective and my lessons in privilege that came from my relationship with Julie that really is the story.
Yeah, and those are some of the most powerful parts of the story is when Aura, she's trying to do the right thing with Blanche and Eddie, and she keeps tripping because her perspective is so different from theirs, growing up African American in that time and place, and they're kind of wrenching, and yet you have a sense that that's how difficult it is to really evolve toward a better relationship between the races. Exactly.
And the good thing about Aura, I didn't want Aura to be a hero or a villain. I want to blur the lines between that because I think that's what makes people think. None of us want to be racists. None of us do. But what we don't know is what gets in the way. And what I'm proud of Aura for was being open to being wrong, being open to see herself reflected in the mirror that Blanche held up for her, which is what Julie did for me. Kindly, with love, questioning me every now and then, never saying, how could you think like that? But just asking the right questions to make me self-reflect. And so that's what Blanche did for Aura, and then some things she saw for herself. And, of course, her first paradigm shift was when she literally crossed the threshold into Blanche's home and saw the black Last Supper on the wall. Because for us, Jesus is white, and which is not true, But when you grow up and you don't know any better, and you don't know what you don't know, and that was Aura. And so when she did learn, to her credit, she made some choices that she wouldn't have made otherwise. And that's what I've tried to undo you.
When she realized the right thing, she did it.
Yes, exactly. And then the lines are also blurred between what is right and what is wrong, what is truth and what is a lie, when is it okay to lie? And all of those change with perspective, which is what this book is about.
Wow. Well, there's a lot in it. And then there was another part of it that led to your sequel. Let's talk about that a little bit, and that's the story of Grace. How does that play out, and how does it connect with your own family history?
Yeah, that was a real personal thing for me, and I never intended to write a sequel. And as I wrote the book, I never made the correlation. It was much later when I was doing book clubs. I Skype with or FaceTime with about a book club a week now that's reading the Pecan Man or the sequel. But I started to notice, as people started asking me questions, I started to notice that what happened with Grace was unresolved childhood traumas. And that led to her drug abuse.
And let's locate Grace in the story. She's Aura's housekeeper's daughter.
Yes, Auralie's housekeeper is Blanche, and Blanche had 5 children, and the youngest was Grace.
Okay.
And she was 6 years old when she is raped by the 16-year-old son of the chief of police. Yeah. And so it was unreported. Blanche insisted she was not taking Grace to the hospital to be checked out because she didn't feel like she would be treated well there. And that was the first, one of Aura's first eye-opening experiences. How do you not take your child who's been raped to get justice. And, justice is for white people.
Yeah. So then this leads to the drug abuse tragedy, and let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, and I only allude to Grace's drug abuse in the very beginning of the book. Mm-hmm. You know that at the end, Grace has run off with a drug dealer, and Blanche is now raising Grace's children. So you know that really sort of at the front. It's not really too much of a spoiler. Mm-hmm. But with book clubs and as I went along, I realized how much the story paralleled the story of my sister. Yeah. My sister had a childhood trauma that was just sort of swept under the rug. And I don't ever want to get into the details of it. Yep. But it was just something, Mom did what she thought was the right thing to do. But my sister, as we grew up in the 70s, pot was sort of around. And my sister started, experimenting with drugs. She was tormented. She never got emotional help. She never got psychological help. And she was a drug addict all of her life. Mm. And so everyone kept asking me. 2012 was when I put the book out, and I started doing book clubs. And people would say, I need to know is Grace going to be okay? And that was the question I got all the time. And here, as an author, you have people asking you about characters as if they are real human beings. That is a profound experience. Mm. And so I started thinking of her like that. But it was too close because my sister had destroyed our family. Her drug abuse had she went through my mom and dad's savings. My mom and dad were the enablers. She was always just, and as it progressed, we stopped having family dinners, family Christmases, all of it. We just imploded. Mm. And we were all angry at her. We all tried to help her. We all tried to get her to go for help, and we were just so angry. And then, so what happened was, I kept thinking about, okay, everybody wants a sequel, and maybe someday I'll write it, but I can't do it now. And in 2015, my sister died of a drug overdose. Mm. And it was not unexpected. We knew this was going to be the way she died. She was 59 at the time. But I had lost my sister long before that. She had been my best friend for many years, but I had lost her long before that. So when she died, it was just like all the anger lifted. I just was not mad anymore. I was sad. I was grieving. I missed her, but I wasn't angry. And that put me in a place where I could write the sequel from a place of compassion for Grace. Mm-hmm. And that's what I try to do. And it also, the funny how life and art sort of commingle is where, as I'm researching for the story, that led me to go to an Al-Anon program, which is for families of addicts. And it changed my life and changed how I thought and changed how I saw the disease. So it's really, and it's been a profound thing to work through and write through. And I think with all the grief, because my mother died 4 months after my sister. She had no terminal diagnosis. She just died of what we think is broken heart syndrome. Yeah. And so the losses for me, and then my sister's daughter died 9 months later of a drug overdose. So, profound grief through several years. But writing this story and going through with it has been the path to healing. I can't say I'm healed, but it's been the path to healing. So I've been real grateful that this has been my life's work. So.
And that book was The Truth About Grace that you published in May of last year?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Well, your own story of the transition into writing was fascinating to me. It sounded as if you were on a track to a promotion at Merrill Lynch to be an operations manager, and there was a day when you just decided that wasn't the life you wanted to lead. At that time, was Kindle Direct Publishing and the whole self-publishing option on the horizon, or did you first try to go traditional before you found your audience through the self-publishing?
It's so funny because I didn't even think about publishing as I was writing. That just wasn't on my radar. What I woke up one day and decided was, not only is this not the job I want to do, this just isn't the person I want to be. And my husband and I had built this place up on the Swanee River, and it was just sort of pardon my French, but screw it, let's just go.
How old were you?
I was 50.
Huh.
No, younger than that. 45. Let's see. I had Emily at 35. She was 8 years old, so I was 42.
Yeah, interesting.
And we moved up to the middle of nowhere, really, the middle of nowhere. And so it still was a process, but no, and it took me another 10 years before I actually wrote the book, finished the book.
Yeah.
But in that time, all I did was I was raising my child and writing the book and writing the story and living the story and all of that. And then when I got the book finished, that's when I started. And it was like, okay, I finally finished this book. I had started things before in my life. I'd never finished a complete work. But in the meantime, I'd been going to all these writers' groups and writers' conferences, and the messages you get, especially as a woman, is don't go into writing if you expect to make a living at it. You can't do this. You can't do that. It's hard to get an agent. It's hard to get a publishing company. But also, for me, being this real DIY, in your face, I can do it myself if you get out of my way, that's who I am. And literally helped my husband build this house. So at that point, I read a story. I was just, I sent it out. No, I did. Let me get back to where I was.
Yeah.
I had finished my book. I was nervous about putting it out. But I queried probably about 5 publishers and about 5 agents, and Algonquin Books, based on 3 chapters, asked for the entire manuscript. And that was like the green light for me. Now, they passed on it, said it was too short, they didn't know what market they would go for, but it was Algonquin Books, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
And they wanted to read my work. And so that was just confirmation for me that I could do it. And then I read an article in, I think, Forbes magazine about an attorney, a woman, a young female attorney who was raising her child and had written this book at night, and she used Amazon's Kindle program. And it told all the different little details about what Kindle will do for you, or Amazon, the whole program will do for you. And she had made like $100,000 pricing her book at like $1.99 or something like that. And my thinking was, I don't want to be a $1.99 author, but it was still, I can do this. And so I looked at Amazon's program, and I'd always been a self-starter. A lot of the things that I had done through work and the successes I had had through my work was being able to figure things out. I am just undaunted by not knowing how to do something. I can look online and figure it out. I can Google it, And so that was what I did. And I looked at the program, and I was just like, this is for me. I have control over everything. I can control the price. I can control where it goes, But it still wasn't even too much thought process about how going forward. It was, how do I shut my family up? Because they want to know when I'm going to publish my book. And so my exact thinking was, Kindle is perfect. I'll put it on Kindle, and it'll be out there. And if nobody likes it and it gets panned, I can pull it back because, no documentation, no history. I can pull it back, and it'll be like it never even happened. And that's how I thought about it. And I didn't do anything. I didn't, put it on my Facebook page. I didn't try to market. I didn't do anything.
Now, it looks like actually, the first day it was available for sale was that January 3rd, 2012.
Yep.
And did you sell any copies that day?
I think my family and friends did a few times. And I remember, like, maybe 3 or 4 months later, I actually sold 100 copies in 1 month. And I thought I had hit the big time. I was just I think maybe 30 that first month, and then not much, and then 61 month, and it just literally, my agent and I call it the little book that could.
What was the price for the Kindle edition when you started out?
$4.99.
Yeah, that's a good price.
I thought like a reader.
Yeah.
I didn't think like a publisher. I didn't think like a witer. I thought like a reader.
Yeah.
What would I be willing to pay for a book that I enjoyed? What would make me go, yeah, I'm going to get that? Because if it were $10, I might go, well, I'm not going to take a chance on it. But at $4.99, I'd pay $5 for a book.
Yeah. And at that price, you're getting 70% of the price of it as royalty, so that was good.
Yeah. And they tell you when you're if you're trying to traditionally publish, you'll be lucky if you make a quarter a book.
Yeah.
And I'm making $3.44 a book per book, and it's kind of a no-brainer for me.
Yeah. So it was sort of a slow and steady, like the little engine that could.
Yes.
Can you say how many you've sold of the Pecan Man so far?
Lordy, I don't keep a big record. I did in the beginning, and I remember when I crossed over the 200,000 mark. But that's selling through Amazon.
Yeah.
Because I did eventually put it out in paperback as well.
Right.
But I don't keep a big record. It's not. I don't have it on the market anywhere else. Only Amazon. It's been good for me. But the way CreateSpace is done now, other booksellers are allowed to buy it. So no way do I know what has come of those. But I'm in libraries, so I try to look at it like this. I would be really, really shocked if I'm not at the 500,000 mark in readers.
Yeah, exactly.
Because readers pass them around and everything else. But I've sold well over 200,000
and
on Amazon.
The other cool thing about it is that the royalties that you earned by doing it enabled you to finish your BA. You got a BFA in writing, and so that was.
I quit my full-time job and went back to school, and now I'm about to go to grad school.
Yeah. Now, that's hot off the press news. Where are you going to grad school to pursue this dream?
Eastern Tennessee State University. It's a master's in communications and storytelling.
Oh wow!
It is not a performance degree. It is because my sensibilities are and my connection is to this concept that you cannot hate someone whose story you know.
Yeah.
Because I'm also a storyteller. I actually do storytelling performance and stuff, and I study how I did in my BFA as well. How can story influence culture and influence social change, bring peace, create empathy among people, that kind of thing. So that's what I'm going to grad school for, is to be able to work with people, because I'm doing that with book clubs now. What the issues that the Pecan Man bring up are really good in book clubs for people they have this sort of degree of separation to see orally and what she's doing, and then they can self-reflect and go, okay, I have some of those things too. I didn't know this either. And so it offers really interesting conversation. And I've just been so proud of being able to be a part in people's change and awareness and self-reflection. So that's what I'm going to grad school for.
Well, and you had you sort of had a statewide book club experience when the book was read by the program in Arkansas. What did you learn about the book and its ability to spark conversations in that? And what year was that?
2017.
Yeah. What did you learn through that?
The State Library of Arkansas chose it for their Common Reader program that's called If Everyone Read the Same Book. And it's worked. It's through their public library system. And Arkansas was a really interesting place to have this happen, because there's a town in Arkansas, and it's one of the towns that I visited, that well known for there not being very many people of color in there, in the town. So it was really interesting. The people were lovely, though. I mean, it was a great experience, and it was just a tour of, it's a week-long tour, basically, of of several libraries where the patrons came in, patrons who read the book, and we discussed it just like we would in a book club. So it was a great experience and something I had not expected. There's been that same thing. This little book that could, it's on Amazon. That's it. She found it through Amazon. My agent found me through Amazon, through the Kindle program. The people who have optioned the Pecan Man as a movie found me through Amazon. These are not. This is what this experience has been for me. Just
you put
really
it out there,
positive.
and some amazing things happened.
Exactly, and that was it. You put it into the world and hope for the best.
Any movement on the movie rights side of it that you can talk about?
They've optioned it twice, and it's the end of the second option is coming up pretty soon, but they've been working on it. The script is already written. They already have a director. It's already been announced in Variety magazine. I think part of the issues may be that they are the casting and things like that, but they really don't tell you a whole lot.
Yeah.
They've been wonderful to work with, and I think they're going to do the story justice. But they, as they're going along, you're not really in the loop as the writer. So
yeah, you get some exciting news someday when it's a lot of these things have fallen into place.
Oh yeah, I've had all these wonderful, exciting things happen, and the latest one is the grad school thing. So
yeah,
it's been crazy. Nothing. People are always ask me, "Is this everything you dreamed of?" And I'm like, I never would have dreamed of. I never would have dreamed of what I'm doing. And I'm still just I'm still just a normal, everyday person out in the community and out in the world, and I don't feel like anything big at all. But the experiences I have had, I never would have dreamed of them. Never.
Yeah, I think you make a reference to that at one point, and I think I've had that same thing. That at a point in my life, I moved from New England to Wyoming, and I had this dream I was going to be, the next great American writer, and just the kind of grandiose fantasy of what that means. It was basically just an image of me sitting at a bookstore signing books, but I didn't really have any idea what it meant to be a full-time writer. And did you have a similar kind of an evolution in your understanding of what it means to be a writer?
Yes, because all of the writers that I had been exposed to were pretty much traditionally published, and many of them, not all of them, some of them were very, very gracious. Chris Crutcher was one that I met that I just thought, he took the time to talk with me, and most authors who have been traditionally published or made it big anyway are a little standoffish, and it is you go to the book signing table and they sign it and you move on. That was not the kind of writer I ever dreamed of being or want to be. I don't. I want to be a writer living in the world, and I want to be I didn't want the fame of writing or I didn't want huge success with a book. I wanted the experience of talking with people about character and story and issues and all of those things. And so that's the kind of writer I always wanted to be. But you really don't know what it's supposed to look like. You just sort of start on the journey and then figure it out as you go along. And I think the choices that you make going along affect how you enjoy the experience. And for me, it's been pleasant the entire time.
Yeah, and then the main thing is to keep going, because you never know what's around the next corner.
Yeah, and it becomes, I'm a firm believer in the law of reciprocity. It becomes, when you put good things out in the world, good things come back. But it's important. In all the writers' conferences, they set things up as like it's this huge competition. It's not a competition. There's enough out there for everyone. It's my job to encourage other writers they're not my competition. Readers are the audience. Writers are just, there's enough out there for all of us. There's plenty of readers to read whatever, and there's an audience out there for every writer.
Yeah. It kind of insatiable demand for good things to read.
For good things to read. And, I see these people struggle with all these rules that people have set up, and I'm like, tell your story. Mm-hmm. That's your job. Tell your story. But I really do. I try to encourage other writers, and I always direct them to Amazon. It's been a great experience for me. The Kindle program was great. There's another funny story about putting it out only in Kindle and not in paper. And I have a friend who's a beautiful artist, and she was just getting back into it. She's a forensic CPA in her everyday life, but she's also a wonderful artist. And she painted a picture of Blanche and Eddie, my two characters from the book, just out of her head, just what she imagined them looking like. And they looked like what was in my head, too. It was crazy. But she had painted it on this flimsy paper, like just paper. And I said, Cassie, what are you doing? What are you doing? Paint on canvas. Paint something permanent. And as soon as the words were out of my mouth, I thought about the fact that I did not want to put this book out in paperback because I didn't want it permanent.
Ah.
And so that was it was my paint on canvas moment, was putting it out on CreateSpace.
Interesting. And do you have any sense of what percentage of the sales are in print versus ebook versus audiobook at this point, or how are most readers reading the story, do you think? It's always been higher in Kindle, in the ebook. How about audiobook versus paper?
I don't really get a good sense of that, because the audio on all three books have been published by Blackstone.
Yeah. And
they do libraries, and so I really don't get a number. I get royalties, but I don't get a number on how many are sold.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I know that a lot of people listen to the audio through the library system. Public library systems are great. Yeah. You just don't make any money on them, but a lot of people read through that way, and I'm glad they do. So
I have been speaking with Cassie Dandridge Selleck, the author of The Pecan Man. Thanks very much, Cassie.
Thank you, Lynn. Thanks for having me.
I'll turn now to the family matters for the rest of the show. My mother, Lois Edgerly, who's 90, has been in some decline in recent weeks. And this week, the situation took a turn that, under our doctor's recommendation, resulted in signing up for hospice service at the place where they live west of Boston. And the service is to assure her comfort, and she's experiencing some pain, and we were very impressed with the wide range of services that hospice is going to be offering the family. And we're probably in a new and final chapter of a long story here, and the family's been gathering to greet Mom, and she's still alert and still very much with us. And we're all traveling this road together, and with, as you can imagine, a lot of strong emotions of one kind or another. So she's very much on my mind, and I want to put the show up quickly today on Friday in case I need to head back to Concord. It's just about a 2-hour drive down there, so I can move back and forth here as is needed in the coming days. What I'm going to include as the second half of the show is I did an audio history with Mom that I recorded back in March of 2011 when they lived in Cambridge. And we divided it up into chapters, and the first chapter of this audio history that she did with me, we titled "How I Won the War," and it is set in Sudbury, Massachusetts, a suburb of Boston, where Mom grew up and Dad also for most of his childhood. And during World War II, she ended up playing a surprising and active role in the national defense. And in family lore, it gets dramatized by remembering how Mom won the war. So here she is talking in the library of the house in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which has since been sold as part of the family's past. And a couple of things you'll hear her mention. Edna was her older sister who has passed on a few years ago. And this story is set, it takes place in a Goodman Hill, which was a hill in Sudbury, Massachusetts, where this particular memory takes place.
Goodman Hill was about a quarter of a mile from the center of town, and it was high naturally, and they built a wooden stand, like a lookout tower, made with just plain wood, and up at the top they had glassed it in, and we were connected to some command center, and people stayed in the tower during daylight and night hours too, to watch for planes coming from the east. In other words, the Germans were flying over with bombers or something, and everybody took a turn. And they had to man it 24 hours a day, so they were getting down to short strokes, I guess, when they had to get little girls in high school. So I must have been, I don't know, in 1941 or 2, what would have I been? 13 or 14. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I was one of the watchers, and we all went and learned how the different planes and what they looked like, and we took a test, and there were B-29 bombers and F-somethings and, fighter planes as well as bombers and cargo planes. And we were supposed to know all the different ones. And we sat there and watched and waited. And if we heard a plane coming, we got out the binoculars and looked through the glass and tried to see if it had a number, if they were low enough. And then we rang in. And we told them which direction they were going. And there was a compass there that, it was pretty easy. They came in from the east, and if they were really bad, they would be going west. But we had to tell them the direction it was flying in. And in those days, there wasn't much traffic from commercial flights, so it was mainly war planes, our own planes going to Europe or whatever. And I'd ride my bike up Goodman Hill and park it on the tower and climb the stairs and sit there. I don't know. I think it must have been a 2-hour shifts, and sit there for 2 hours, watch.
How high was it?
Oh, pretty high. I'd bet it was. It could have been 30 feet high or 25 feet high or something like that. It took us beyond the tree line, and so it was pretty high.
And it was built just for that purpose. It hadn't been.
No, it had never been there before. No. They were just finding a place that they could watch from, and it was all part of the civil defense. Like Will's dad was an air raid warden, and when it was dark, and my dad too, they would walk around the town, and if they saw one crack of light coming through the window, they had to knock on the door and tell them to fix their windows.
Was that every night?
We weren't supposed to have any light showing. So they were civil defense, watchers, Dad and his father. And it was all part of that effort. I forget what they called it, but, the war effort or town civil defense or whatever. Anyway. And
what did your mother do?
Well, she rolled bandages with the ladies at the town hall, and there was a day every week that you did that. And they'd all go up and roll bandages for the Red Cross or whatever. They were all being sent overseas. Plus, all the ladies were knitting.
What would they knit?
Well, they knit scarves, and my mother was a bad knitter, so all I saw her do was knit scarves. But some people could knit, socks and gloves. And my friend Al Young, who owned the Al Young store there just over the railroad track from my house. And he and I were good friends, and he was elderly, and he sat there behind the counter with his dog, and we would always chat, and all the time I was chatting with him during those years. He was knitting socks out of olive-colored yarn. And nobody in the town, he could knit so fast, and nobody in the town ever kidded him or anything. That was his effort. He was too elderly to go round at night with a flashlight, but anyway, he knit socks. And everybody sort of did something.
Yeah.
And the kids in high school, it was a very small high school, there weren't many of us, and the children that lived in North and South Sudbury, it was hard for them to watch for the airplanes because it would have been hard to get there because the bus took them to school. There were no buses. And everybody was saving gas, so bikes were what you used. Anyway, I always I laugh because, I mean, what a little, wet behind the ears girl up there supposedly spotting airplanes. Luckily, I didn't have to really see a German plane.
Was it scary?
No, it was just matter of fact. Everything was matter of fact.
Just the way it is.
Just the way it was. And then I'd get on my bike and go home. I don't think my parents wanted me to ever be a watcher at night. I don't think they had any of the kids watch at night. It was harder to tell what kind of planes they were, too. So, but they had always questioned me. I had been out there, and what did I see, and had I seen a plane, and everybody was interested.
Did Edna do it, too?
No, and see, I have a feeling she had gone by then. She had gone to college, because she didn't finish high school, because in those days everybody was being speeded up, and she left high school. She was very smart, and she left in her junior year, and Tufts took her as a freshman. She was gone to Tufts, and no, I don't think she was a watcher.
Now, they interrupted school once in a while when special things happened.
Oh, yeah, and then Al Flynn, he was the wonderful principal of the school, and he had started his life in Sudbury by being a boarder at my Grammy's house up over the hill. And he wasn't married then or anything, but anyway, he knew my family very well, and he was very fond of me. And everybody loved Al Flynn, and yet he was not to be fooled with. He was stern and straight away. But every now and then, we all had gotten used to planes going overhead. It was wartime, and all the planes were coming and going. But in Otis Airfield and Devon's had airfield, so there was a lot going by Sudbury in the air. But I don't know how he would know. I don't know whether Dave Buxton would call Al Flynn at the school and say, "Mr. Flynn, I'm going to be flying over in a few minutes," or whatever. But he would announce on his loudspeaker that went to all 12 grades. There were 6 rooms downstairs and 6 rooms up in that school. And over the loudspeaker would come, "Dave Buxton is flying over, and you can all go out and watch and wave." And I mean, the amusing thing, I mean, it was against the law. These guys weren't supposed to be buzzing their hometowns, and he was flying a big bomber, and it seemed big to us anyway. And we all ran out into the driveway, which was big, because the school buses had to pull in around there, and we waved, and he'd he'd go and come down, and then he'd make a big circle and come back, and everybody cheered. It was happening. But that just happened, I imagine. I can't remember how many times we were let out to see Dave. And luckily Dave survived the war and came home a hero.
Well, my mother, Lois Stiles Edgerly, has always been a hero for me, and she survived the war and many other challenges in a long and notable life. She wrote 2 books, and she was an artist, and she's kept the family together over decades, and a formidable woman with an eye for emotions, for what keeps people together and what keeps them apart, an exceedingly wise and deep woman with nearly unlimited creativity. Some of that, I hope, has rubbed off on me, and most of what I know about how to treat people and what love is about comes from my mother and her relationship with my father. They've been married 71 years now, and when they lie in bed together, waiting for whatever's coming, they often hold hands. And they had their honeymoon up here in Ocean Park, Maine, and there's great pictures of them on the beach in 1948 at their honeymoon. So this is a love story, and we're appear to be in the final chapter, which makes everything particularly vivid and important. And glad to share this with you, and hope that you'll keep my mother in your prayers. And thank you for listening. Hope you have a good day. Bye.